Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law Section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association section of Antitrust Law. My name is John Roberti. On today's episode, it's called Is Your Smart Speaker Spying? Understanding the Privacy Law Issues Involving In-Home Assistants. For many of us, the smart speaker or the in-home assistant was an amazing technological development. We find it to be very, very convenient. It knows a lot about us. It knows a lot about what we need. It helps us to get at information or things we want very quickly. But there may be a cost to that. To help us, it needs to know a lot about us. And the information that these smart speakers or in-home assistants gather, what happens to it and what does it all mean? We have a guest today who's going to explain all of that to us. My co-host today is Anora Wang. Hi, Anora.
Hi, John.
So, Anora, what are we doing today?
Today, we're going to learn what laws might come in play when there are increasing concerns over the privacy issues when you are using smart home devices and what actions the enforcers might be taking or considering to take in the future.
Why is this important? Why do we care?
Well, more and more homes are quote-unquote connected now. Take myself, for example. I have a smart device, laying around, and then sometimes I wonder, is it listening to me?
I'm sure it is. So, Anora, who's our guest?
Our guest today is Phyllis H, who is a co-chair of the ABA Antitrust Law Section's Privacy and Information Security Committee, and she is a partner at the law firm Hunton Andrews Kurth, heading the firm's advertising counseling practice. Phyllis was also previously a chief of staff for advertising practices at the Federal Trade Commission, leading the FTC's Children's Privacy Enforcement Program.
Great. Phyllis, welcome to the program.
So glad to be here.
Welcome, Phyllis. So, starting out, we want to just do a survey of the landscape. So, what kind of devices are we talking about? What kind of device might be listening in our lives?
So, Anora, it was interesting. You said you had a device in your home. I would have said, I don't have one in mine. But in fact, I'm wrong. Because even though I am not a connected home, I have a smart television. And people don't think about all of the various devices that might be on in their homes. Smart doorbells, smart garage door openers, smart televisions, refrigerators, coffee makers, smart voice assistants or in-home butlers, smart light bulbs even. It runs the gamut. You can have your entire home wired up and connected and controlled, so to speak, or so you think, by yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Every time when I have someone come over and I feel like I have something new and fancy, a new gadget I need to show off, that's potentially a privacy concern sitting there. So given so many homes are connected now, and I think increasingly so, what kind of concerns should we have? Are consumers aware of this kind of surveillance activity going on?
It sounds really burdensome when you say, are these devices spying on me, right? The hairs on everybody's arms stand up. But in fact, depending on how you define spying, the answer is yes. The purpose of these devices is to make your life more convenient. But the secondary purpose is for these devices to start to anticipate your needs. And to do that, they become smarter with the use of artificial intelligence. And to do that, they have to record your commands and your requests and then build themselves to be more responsive to your needs and to the needs of the other consumers. There's an awful lot of data that's being collected on these smart home speakers, data that you are submitting. And in some cases, there have been reports of data that's just picked up in the ambient atmosphere by consumers who don't realize that their smart device might be listening all the time.
Yeah, it's definitely true, and it's rational, right? When you think about it, if I want my smart devices to be smart enough, I get to feed it with new information, new data point, and then it's going to learn my habit and then start to be smarter. But not every consumer is so aware when they start, for example, the light bulbs, the thermostat. I don't anticipate it to record my living habit for every night, right? But when I do have such a privacy concern, and if there is a real privacy violation issue, what laws might come in play? Are there federal laws or state laws that's currently looking out for consumers in this aspect?
I would say the Federal Trade Commission is one of the primary players in this area. They have issued a number of cases involving the insecurity of in-home devices, and that ranges from routers to cameras to toys to baby monitors, kind of anything that has been connected. They are looking at whether there are privacy gaps in the security offerings of those devices. So that is one set of laws. There have been introduced laws that specifically address smart devices and connected devices in this eavesdropping issue, but there aren't any in place. Rather, we have at the federal level, the National Institute for Standards, NIST, they have issued a set of guidelines that are voluntary for industries to follow. My understanding is those guidelines are still in draft form, and they were taking input from industry and from consumers on them. But those guidelines address security and not privacy. And I think we're here today to talk both about the issues of security and privacy. And what I mean by that are privacy kind of deals with how much information you're taking in, and security deals with how you're treating that information once you take it in.
Right. That's actually a very helpful clarification. So as a regular consumer like myself, I would be concerned how much data of myself is being collected. And once it's collected, I would, as a rational consumer, I would assume whoever I buy that device from is collecting them. But are they also transferring to a third party without my consent? Is there any use that's going beyond whatever I have consented to? Would that sort of shed light on what you just described, the difference between privacy and security, right? Would it get out of the hand of the people that I have already consented to give to? Is that correct?
Well, that's right. I think you can break this up into three parts. What data is being recorded, how that data is being retained, and whether that data is being shared. Whether consumers are being asked to consent to each of those three steps is an open question. And then whether consumers' consent is really and truly informed is another question. You may have blown through particular agreements in setting up your smart devices, not understanding quite what it is that you're consenting to. Then we have a whole other set of consumer awareness questions. You may want the convenience, for example, of a smart thermostat, and you may enjoy that the thermostat anticipates your needs so that it increases the heat when you come home in the evening. You might not appreciate that that thermostat also might know when you've woken up in the middle of the night because of heat sensors and changes in temperature as you're moving through your house. Those two different expectations, kind of what you want as a consumer and what actually might be happening, there might be a mismatch there. And then where does my waking hour versus sleeping hour information go? Is it held just by the thermostat company? Or even more specifically, is it only held in my smart hub and not combined with other information? If the thermostat company happens to own a whole set of other services, does that information get combined? Is it shared with third parties? Who exactly is using that data to become smarter? And I think there could be decision points by consumers at every step. That's the optimal world.
Yeah, just to play along that hypo a little bit more. So if my thermostat is knowing my habit and potentially by monitoring my living habit, it detected some potential health concern. And then that kind of data could be sold or transferred to some company that, manufactures some devices that would help me with my health. But then potentially I would get advertising information about that kind of devices. I would have felt a little intruded upon in my life, but I don't know how to think about it. It's also helping me, right? It might be giving me information that I did not have before and, prevent me from getting into a worse status, right? So for consumers, there are all these kinds of questions that's just sort of floating around, and we don't know what laws might come in. And then just to recap a little bit, you said the NIST and the FTC are currently considering and possibly issuing standards that would be nationwide levels. Is that correct?
That's correct. The NIST draft that was circulated in August of 2019 was called a starting point for Internet of Things manufacturers. So it really was a set of specific but high-level voluntary guidance that was intended to start the discussion. The FTC has also issued a series of recommendations called Start with Security. They have repeated and updated guidance for device manufacturers, and not just for consumers considering how to handle their privacy once they've purchased one of these items. So I would say there is kind of a circling of the wagons approach here. You've got a combination of law enforcement, circulated guidelines, particular standards, congressional worry, increased press attention. There are a lot of factors that are feeding into this ecosystem. The FBI, for example, issued a warning in December of 2019 about smart televisions and whether a consumer's television might be spying. And one of the things that has come out in the press is that it's not just when a consumer activates a particular service. There could be eavesdropping, so to speak, in the atmosphere, kind of behind the scenes. Even if a consumer hasn't downloaded a particular feature, a device may just as default be recording consumers' viewing patterns, usage habits, and other things. So it can be very daunting for consumers who want to rely on the government to help regulate these things, but quite a bit of the control has been put back in the hands of consumers. And it's not that easy for consumers to turn on and off some of these features. We'll go back to what you said before, Anora. You want your device to become smarter so that it helps you. But if you turn off recording, or if you ask for your records to be deleted, which you can do if you figure out how to do that, maybe then your device doesn't work as well for you.
So many times when we talk about these things, and I'm educated on it, what I realize is a lot of it comes down to consumer consent. If people know what they're doing and they agree to a certain level of information being shared, or people knowing it, then generally we get comfortable around that. I guess my question is, does consent really work well here, where it's so hard to figure out exactly what's going on and where all the data is headed? Can we really come up with a system where consent will fix the problem?
We may not be able to, especially if the consent is blunt force. I want to use this product, therefore I consent to all sorts of collection, retention, and sharing practices. If the consent could be more specific or granular, as I've said, that might work. But there are privacy advocates who argue that the United States notice and consent scheme isn't necessarily the most privacy protective, and that instead we should focus on privacy by design, which is a term that you've heard quite a bit and going back for a number of years, which really is the focus on actual uses and the need for the collection of information, and data minimization principles being activated before you ask a consumer for their consent.
What do you mean by data minimization?
So there's a concept that industry and technology vendors should not collect information just because they can. They should collect the information that's necessary to make the product work, and arguably that could be to make the product smarter. But they should not collect more information with the idea that, well, maybe we'll use it later down the road. And why not collect it now? We can't envision quite yet the uses, but they may appear. And then there's this idea that you should only hold on to data for as long as is reasonably necessary to effectuate the actual activity. If we go down to the very specific, let's say in voice recordings, and the FTC has articulated this for children's privacy, they have kind of green-lighted the use of children's voices as a substitute for written search. So if a child wants to activate their smart speaker and issue a command, under the children's privacy laws, that's actually covered as a data collection for which you would have to get parental consent. But if that command is just a substitute for written words and you're going to immediately delete it after the command is issued, you can collect it without having to get parental permission. That is kind of a cabined, buttoned-down data minimization example that might work more broadly in other settings.
I have two follow-up questions. So for one, in order to achieve this data minimalization, are we taking a self-governance approach? Like, who is making sure that the government is the companies are collecting the minimum, the whatever that's absolutely necessary, not beyond? Who is making sure of that?
Well, it's not necessarily a ubiquitous concept, and so companies at this point, the onus would be on them to have minimum uses. Sometimes when there is objection by the public or particular practices come to light after press reports, you'll see companies ratcheting down their data collection and changing their policies accordingly.
Right. And my other follow-up question was, so you mentioned children, right? They would need parental concern for a certain type of data collection. So in the grand scheme of things, are we taking a heightened scrutiny, I guess, a heightened level of protection for certain people, certain groups of people like children, and then also for certain type of information like, medical or health-related information or financially related information? Is that sort of the sectoral approach that's still the current state of things within the federal standards that's being considered?
The Federal Trade Commission has always articulated particular categories of information as warranting heightened protection. And Anora, you've hit on those categories quite well. They are health information, financial information, information about children. The last category, information about children, is regulated by a separate law. The other categories would be viewed by the law enforcers as particularly sensitive and warranting protection if a problem were to arise.
Right. So covering just the states' action a little bit, are there states taking actions? Have they toyed with the idea of promulgating their own standards?
There have been a couple of bills introduced in various states. California and Illinois come to mind, but those bills haven't gotten very far. So for now, it's a wait-and-see approach.
And then just to clarify a little further for our listeners, so the California bill, which is not to be confused with their CCPA, their general data privacy law that has passed and come into effect, right?
That's correct. This was an an IoT specific security law. So it was called...
And IoT is what? I'm sorry.
Internet of Things.
Yes, of course.
There we go. So it was an Internet of Things specific security law, separate from the recently enacted California Consumer Privacy Act.
So the CCPA currently would not cover, I guess at least not sufficiently to what we have discussed today, right? The data collection and potentially data use from the smart home devices.
Well, it could, especially if you are selling consumers' information. But that law does not specifically address in-home connected devices.
Phyllis, I'd like you to look into your crystal ball and tell us where do you think this is going? What do you think we can expect to see as regulators think about this issue? Where do you think the regulation is headed?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to do a technology-specific set of laws. I usually hearken back to the federal children's privacy law as an example. Certainly smart speakers were on no one's horizon 20 plus years ago when that law was enacted. But the law had general enough language that the Federal Trade Commission has been able to say with each half generation since it was enacted, this particular kind of service or device is covered without us having to alter the statute in any way. So they came out with a connected toys case a couple of years ago, kind of easy to put within that rubric. Smart speakers, I think the FTC would absolutely consider those to be covered without any change in the law as well.
Well, it's so much fun talking to you, Phyllis. I guess coming back, I just want to have, putting my young professional head and asking, for the benefit of my peers, what makes it fun for you to do what you do? And did it start to be this fun when you started your career?
So I think this is a super fun area. I would encourage people to look into it. My career has taken a number of paths. I was at the Federal Trade Commission for 17 years, and during that time I actually helped to revise the children's privacy law. So there's nothing more fun than helping to write a regulation that you then have to help your clients enforce. When I came out into private practice, I would say one of the most fun aspects currently in this area is dealing with connected devices which don't have keyboards connected to them. So where are you going to deliver that privacy notice? How are you going to get consent? And I do help my clients develop on-screen, on-device notices. I'm not a technologist in any way, but I kind of get to play one on TV in working with IT folks and not just the lawyers in compliance. It is very fun.
Phyllis, I want to ask you a question, and this isn't really me asking for legal advice, but my children raised a complaint with me recently. So I live outside of Washington, D.C., and some time ago there was a big snowstorm that had come through. And unfortunately, I had to be in California for a court appearance. So just as the snow was beginning, I got on a plane and left. And so I was sitting in a conference room preparing for the court appearance, and my phone kept going off. And there was my wife by herself shoveling the snow on our walk. And it was our smart doorbell, watching my wife shovel the snow. And my children were nowhere to be found.
So do you want a device that can get your children into their snow pants and out onto the front walkway to help their mother?
That's what I'm looking for. When I called them and told them to get out of bed and help their mother, they told me it was a violation of their privacy. Did they have any sort of a claim?
They didn't. But you did.
I have lots and lots. Well, and my wife did, and that was sort of that's sort of where we have left things. Phyllis, tell us something about yourself. If we only knew you professionally, tell us something you find interesting that we wouldn't know.
I'm going to tell you two things. The first is that I had a really oddball job the summer before I went to college. My father desperately wanted me to go to medical school. And so he arranged for me to put on a lab coat and to be a phlebotomist in a hospital in our community. If I tell you I had zero training, it would scare the pants off of you. But I became a very good phlebotomist, eventually over the course of that summer. But currently, the thing I think is kind of fun about myself is that I can hold a headstand in yoga for 15 minutes.
That's impressive.
Thank you.
So would you say you're in the top 3 among phlebotomy in the antitrust law section?
I can safely say that, even though I haven't drawn blood in years.
And I regularly have blood drawn against me, but that generally happens in court. So let's get to our final segment, which we call The Curious Hat.
And now it's time for The Curious Hat.
You did not see the music coming, right?
I have in my hand an actual hat that has actual questions in it, and we're going to ask Phyllis to pull a question out of the hat, and we're going to ask her the question that's on the card. So
I'm scared. All right, I dug deep.
Okay, good. You come up with question number 5. Oh, this isn't a bad one. Are there any TV series that you are watching?
What am I not watching? I binge watch anything that anyone tells me to watch. So I just finished the Israeli show, Prisoners of War, that served as the underpinning to the American show Homeland. And I watched the entire Israeli series in 4 days.
Wow.
Interesting. What time of day are you generally watching this?
After everybody goes to sleep in my house.
And does your smart TV know about that?
I'm watching it on my connected device, so probably everybody knows.
All right. And with that, thank you. We will see you next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.